everyone, and welcome to AFI Fest 2020, presented by Audi. My name is Malin, and I'm a programmer with the festival. Before we begin today's discussion, I would just like to thank all of our supporters, our presenting sponsor Audi, our AFI members, as well as you, our audience. Thank you all so much for tuning into this very special virtual edition of AFI Fest. You should have all just seen HOPPER WELLES, which just premiered at the Venice Film Festival, and here with me today is producer Filip Jan Rymsza and editor Bob Murawski. Thank you both so much for bringing this incredible film to light. This conversation itself is just so tremendously engaging. Their forthrightness and their willingness to challenge one another on, with such different approaches. But I think one of the things that really makes this film so fascinating is the specific context of their careers at that time. Knowing that Hopper was seen as this rebellious filmmaker, but he hadn't yet suffered any of the consequences that Welles had. Of course, he was editing the last movie at the time, but there really is just so much here to kind of dig into that the 130 minutes just flies by. I've already gone back to the film once, and I get the sense that I could watch it over and over again, and something new would strike me each time. So thank you again for including it in the festival and for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thanks for having us, Malin.
This is not the first Wellesian venture for either of you. You both collaborated on the posthumously released Orson Welles film, The Other Side of the Wind. I just want to start by learning how you became involved in that project.
So for me, I guess it's been about 11 years from the time I found out about that the rights to The Other Side of the Wind were available, which obviously, that was the beginning of a very long journey. And I read about the film, or at least a mention of the film, in a piece that was in Vanity Fair, and it was on Ambersons, and it was part of a collection of short stories on troubled productions, and at the very end of it was a mention of The Other Side of the Wind. So I had some prior knowledge, and then I took a meeting at the Cannes Film Festival with somebody who was an associate of Oya Kodar's, and I was simply told that there was this unfinished Orson Welles movie, and if I'd be interested, which then started me on a 9-year journey to finish Other Side of the Wind. And that's also how I came to have the materials for HOPPER WELLES.
And Bob, how did you become involved?
Well, I'd heard about the movie, but became semi-involved about around 2002 when I moved to Studio City and discovered that Gary Graver, the cinematographer of Other Side of the Wind, was my neighbor. He lived down the street from me. And I really knew him primarily as a cameraman who had shot a lot of exploitation movies like Toolbox Murders and Horror of the Blood Monsters, and a lot of movies with blood in the title. And I was visiting him, and he had a little editing room set up in his garage, and I saw a bunch of boxes that said Orson Welles Project. And I said, wow, Gary, what's that? I kind of knew he had worked with Orson Welles, and he goes, well, that's Orson Welles' unfinished movie, Other Side of the Wind. And I've been trying to get it finished all these years since Orson died. And I said, wow, that's really great. I said, at some point we should get together. I'm an editor and try to finish it. Maybe like when I'm between shows or on weekends or whatever. And Gary ended up passing away. And I thought that would be the end of my involvement. But then years later, I heard that Filip had found the movie and was finishing it. And I met with he and Frank Marshall, and talked them into hiring me to work on the movie. So it was great to be able to come back to it after all those years and actually be able to work on it.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
And, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying, yeah, I'm agreeing. Yeah, it was very fortuitous because I figured once Gary died, and it was like such a weird fantasy thing anyway, because I just had this like mistaken notion that he had everything and we could just kind of work on nights and weekends. But as it turns out, it was a lot more complicated than I realized. And it really took somebody like Filip to, clear up all the issues, get the negative, which was in France, and really make everything happen, which took years on his part. So in my naivete, I really underestimated, what it would take to get the movie done. But I was so happy to come on at the end, and it was, very, very rewarding to be on that movie.
So this being kind of the second Orson Welles film that you both have worked on, I guess I'm curious about your kind of personal feelings about the director and how kind of really delving into this material has helped you or has made you change your feelings about him over the course of these projects.
Well, this is such a different beast. And coming back into it, and Bob and I being able to work on it in secret was really nice. The other side of the wind, obviously, there was so much expectation, and even though we kind of locked away and made the movie like he would make any other movie, not really kind of hearing and kind of playing into the curiosity around the film. This was something totally different. This was something that Bob and I had seen during the editing sessions of Other Side of the Wind. I know that Bob felt very passionately about it, but we knew that it felt like a totally standalone piece, something totally separate. And for me, it really took a little bit of distance to kind of step away from it for about 1.5 2 years, and then come back to it. And I was struck by this strange idea that the film was really, still the same as it was when I watched it when we were editing Wind, but the times had changed, and suddenly the material had become so timely. Because the stuff that I remembered was really more the first half hour when they're talking about films and filmmaking and really the craft of it. And then the second part of it, everything that was going on politically suddenly really struck me. And that's really, kind of this strange journey that it took us on. And at that point, I felt like, I think this is something really worth pursuing. And that was part of the agency, and really through my friend Nick Ebeling, who did Along for the Ride, the Dennis Hopper documentary, really encouraged me to take a look at it. And then the Venice Film Festival found out that I was working on it. And so all those things came together. And of course, I picked up the phone and I called Bob and I said, do you want to do another one of these?
And I said, let's start right now. I mean, I was ready to go because I just looked at first to have any opportunity to work on an Orson Welles movie is just incredible beyond belief for anybody who's a film lover. But then to be able to follow it up with another project and something that I knew that the footage was like really great and entertaining and something that I thought audiences would respond to. It was great, and I was so glad that we could do it, and I'm glad that people are receiving it as we hope they would.
Yeah, and getting to the footage, I think a lot has been written about the number of reels, the sheer number of reels that you had to go through. You include the titles in the beginning of the film, which sets the kind of time and place of this footage. And in the documentary, The Love Me When I'm Dead, we see the footage in the context of dozens of other snippets that he was shooting over the course of this long production. Could you talk about what else is there, what else is in that footage, and what kind of struck you about wanting to take this footage and make something else of it?
Well, for me, I mean, this footage, Orson never really intended to, as far as I know, make it into a feature-length film. It was just footage that he was shooting for Other Side of the Wind. So the conceit of Other Side of the Wind is he's having a 70th birthday party, and a lot of like filmmakers and film students and cinephiles have been invited to the party. And he invited a few like real people, like Dennis Hopper, Henry Jaglom, Paul Mazursky, Curtis Harrington, and shot interviews with them that he was just planning on using a few little snippets throughout the movie. Maybe at some point, John Huston's character, Jake Hannaford, was going to interact with them. So Orson was going to take some of the footage some of the questions that he shot with Hopper and take those answers and then maybe shoot John Huston's side as if they were having an interview or interaction. He never ended up shooting the John Huston material, but he still ended up using a few of the snippets just in the introduction to the party scene. So you really just see a few seconds of Hopper, you see a few seconds of the other filmmakers, and it's just all sort of a introduction to the party montage. In terms of all that footage, most of the footage really is in service of Other Side of the Wind. I mean, it's pretty much all relates to Other Side of the Wind. There's a lot of footage, but there's not really something that could become its own movie. There's the kind of film within the film, the color art film that he's shooting. And, even that, I don't think we could ever really put it together to make a film because he just really shot pieces that would service what he needed them to service in the Other Side of the Wind feature. But the great thing about the Hopper Welles footage was that, he essentially, Orson always liked to shoot a lot of film. So instead of just shooting like 10 or 15 minutes and getting what he needed, he sat Hopper down and it was just like an evening where they were just talking. And he probably knew that very little of the footage would apply, but he just wanted to shoot. You know, he had 2 cameramen, he had a recordist, and he had a lot of film, and that was just the way Orson worked. And, you know, it's similar with the footage for the other filmmakers. There's a kind of a 2-hour conversation with Paul Mazursky and Henry Jaglom. It's not nearly as compelling as the Hopper Wells thing for a number of reasons, but it's still like a lot of interesting material.
But we didn't, I think, but we didn't really edit this thing down. I mean, it's, you know, there was under 5 hours of material. I think it's 4 hours and 48 minutes.
Well, say 5 hours, but it's really 2 cameras. So it's really about 2 hours and 20 or 30 minutes of actual material shot with 2 cameras.
So the net of it, if, you know, we're at 2 hours and 10 minutes. So really, you know, I mean, save some, you know, kind of rollouts and false starts and whatever the case might be. Really, this is the conversation in its entirety. And, you know, we were faced with the idea, at least early on, and trying to figure out some way to edit this thing down. And ultimately, you know, Bob and I kept going back and forth and trying to figure out which parts, because as a conversation, it does kind of ebb and flow. And it is redundant at times, but it's really part of its charm. And so we didn't really know what to pull. And I think, you know, especially with Bob having the ability to show the film in LA, because we were actually finishing this film remotely. I was in Europe and Bob was in LA. And so Bob had a chance to show it to a bunch of people, and they responded to different parts, and same on my end. So we just figured, you know, this is a it's a historical document of sorts. It's a conversation that, you know, it has its own flow, and let's just preserve it as is, and let's not censor anything. Even those awkward moments, I do think play really well within the context of the whole.
Yeah, and this being, you know, a scene in the other side of the wind, as well as this kind of unscripted conversation, it's kind of so fascinating when Hopper does call him Hannaford, you know, when there are those kind of moments where you're jumping back to the other side of the wind. Do you know if he was given instructions to do that, or is there any sort of documentation, or is there any sort of off-camera direction that Wells gives him?
I mean, there's really no
we know that Wells invited him, and that he knew that the invite was that he was preparing to do Other Side of the Wind. And there was already some material. I think they started shooting in August of 70, and this is November of 70. Although there was no finished script that I had seen. I think that was dated prior to early 72, which is not to say that there weren't drafts out there that simply, you know, we never got our hands on. But it's, you know, I think it's clear that he knew who the character of Jake Hannaford was. And Orson often, I think, says a couple times, remember who you're talking to. And then in reference to, you know, whose side of the war he was on. Although I was really struck in this by how that Orson does maintain his voice for most of the conversation. I feel like some of the Hannaford or Jake, you're such a tough man to talk to, is a lot of times Hopper trying to run away from the confrontation. Which happens, I think, more often on his side. But yeah, I think that's part of the charm of it sometimes, is that you don't know if Orson's speaking in his voice or Hannaford's.
Yeah, I mean, it's typical of Orson Welles, where you don't really know the true story, which is kind of his technique that dates back to War of the Worlds. You know, it's he's just you know, it's this kind of meta filmmaking way that he worked, and you know, Other Side of the Wind, Apropos was part of it. And it's also interesting that Hopper was sort of working in the same kind of world with the last movie. You know, he was also making a film about filmmaking, and a film that was, the audience is never really sure whether they're watching the film or they're watching the filmmakers making the film. So it all plays into that, and I think that's what really makes it interesting.
Hopper's also sometimes playing a character of sorts. I mean, you know, he's testing out this or workshopping the material that he ends up improvising in Apocalypse Now, all that stuff with fractions. So it's interesting. True. I mean, I think in some respects they're both play acting.
And of course, you know, Hopper being an actor, he's used to acting. You know, whenever actors do interviews, it's like it's hard to separate whether they're kind of playing the part or just being themselves. And I think that's true of Hopper. You know, he started through a lot of it, but I think there's a lot of it that where he comes off as really natural and just kind of like a surprisingly vulnerable guy, which I think is what people respond to in the movie as well, because they're used to this image of Dennis Hopper as this like totally unhinged character that they mostly know from movies like Apocalypse Now or Blue Velvet, or even from his reputation during the Easy Rider days. But, there was kind of all these misconceptions about even this shoot, that he was high through the whole thing and he was smoking pot. But when you look at it, he's clearly just chain smoking regular Marlboro cigarettes. And I think he's kind of in a weird way, on his best behavior because he's working with Orson. So I think the whole drug thing was, more part of his image than anything. And this kind of shows a real side of him, which I think hasn't been seen before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to ask about, the other people that are in the room, who they are, and if they're still living. Have they seen this film, and were they consulted as you were putting it together?
There's Glenn Jacobson with the beard who's sitting, there's three of them in a way. There's Janice Pennington. Who
ended up becoming a Playboy playmate, and also ended up becoming the main model on The Price is Right, Bob Barker's main model, presenting the prizes. So she had a long career of doing that kind of stuff. And then of course
Michael's
Graver a few times.
Yeah, Gary, and then his wife, then wife Connie Graver was the camera assistant. Michael Stranger's there, who was the gaffer. And I sent bits and pieces to both Glenn and Michael because we were having a tough time IDing some of the people. I mean, obviously, seeing as how the only sources of light are that lantern and then the fireplace, it's really hard to make out some of their faces. And it's funny because Glenn and Michael gave totally contradictory accounts of where this was, when it was, who was there. And then we sent, and then I think we sent stuff to Frank Marshall too, just to see if I remembered anybody. And he actually was the one who ID'd Janice. But this is, this predates Frank meeting Orson. So, because he didn't end up becoming involved in any of this stuff until I think 72. So, so these were the early days of this Visto unit that they ended up calling themselves as.
And the famous New Hollywood producer Bert Schneider is there as well. I think there's one part. I think it was him off camera. You kind of see a guy in silhouette, and I think that may have been Bert Schneider, but they refer to him a few times as well.
Wow. So you both have just premiered this film at the Venice Film Festival, and I believe tonight, we're pre-recording this, so I believe it's tonight, it's at the New York Film Festival. Can you tell me about any plans you have afterwards to do a kind of wider VOD or theatrical release?
We're still going to let it play out the festival circuit for now. I think it's one of those pieces that we really wanted to be able to show it to audiences wherever in-person festivals are still happening. And for the most part, I've stuck around Europe post-Venice because really that's where the largest concentration of them are going to be happening in the next couple of months. But I mean, it's, the drawback of surprising the world with another Welles movie and not saying anything about it until Venice announced it is that the world's kind of catching up to it. So it's we've had a lot of interest. And so we'll see what happens, but likely, it's something that Bob and I, love the theatrical model, and we talked about being able to still show this whenever, there's a vaccine and kind of theaters open again. We'd love to show it. Obviously, it's something that is a niche property, but it played so wonderfully on the big screen in Venice. We'd love for people to have an opportunity to see it that way.
Yeah, even though it's over 2 hours long, and you would think it would be sort of a test of the audience's endurance, you really become pulled into the movie. And I think the great thing about watching it in the theater is that, you can't turn it off even if you would want to, but, you're just kind of there watching it, taking it in with an audience. And I think it's a good audience movie because, like Philip said, there's a lot of different things that people respond to. And there's actually a lot of laughs in the movie, which I think is great. And plus the fact that it's shot on film, it's so rare for a new movie to come out on film these days. And for something that's shot in 16 millimeter and black and white, I think it's going to be a unique theatrical experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm jealous. I really wish I could have seen this.
I'm jealous too. I haven't seen that on the big screen yet myself because I was unable because of this COVID stuff to go to Venice. But so I'm actually dying to see it. I guess AFI is not really screening it in any theatrical venues this year. How sad.
Get us that drive-in, please.
Or maybe we can sneak into that theater you guys have up there in Griffith Park and take a look at it.
Well, thank you both so much for bringing this film to the world, for taking the time to talk with me today. I'm so happy that we're able to present it as part of AFI Fest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for watching. We would love to hear from you on social media at #AFIFest. And please join us for more great films and virtual events at fest.afi.com. I particularly want to recommend another film in the program, a beautiful 4K restoration of Dennis Hopper's 1980 film, Out of the Blue, starring the late, great Linda Manz. So please check that out, and we hope you have a great film festival.